Well, hey everybody from Grand Valley. Just posting out this last one for that test review. Just want to make sure that you understand a couple things with the test. Right now I'm looking at Blackboard. I'll announce in the announcements later this week exactly how you're going to take the test, under what section you'll do it, and we'll go from there. But this is a review for you for this last final test for your exam 3. I want you to know that make sure that you know what the Fourth Amendment is, okay? Make sure you know, you know, everything about the Fourth Amendment, because there'll be a lot of scenarios in this test that deal with the Fourth Amendment. And with that, also know what Terry v. Ohio. Remember, Terry v. Ohio, that has to do with Terry pat-downs, okay? But also has to do with the Terry stop. I want you to understand something. If you have reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot, based upon specific and articulable facts, at that point you have the right to stop and detain someone. Now, Terry v. Ohio gives you the right to stop and detain. It does not give you the right to arrest. Remember, Terry v. Ohio is reasonable suspicion. Probable cause gives you the right to arrest somebody. However, under Terry v. Ohio, reasonable suspicion. But there's two parts to Terry v. Ohio. And I want you to understand this because there's going to be questions that you might see in scenarios. So, in order to stop somebody and detain them, again, reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot or happening based upon specific and articulable facts. So you see somebody, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, all the businesses are closed. You see somebody hiding behind a building. As you drive by in your police car, you look, and all of a sudden you see somebody behind the building, they see you and they quick hide behind a bush. All right, based upon that, businesses are closed, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you see someone, they quick hide when they see you. That's suspicious. At least I hope you would think that would be suspicious, all right? Why is this person around a business 3 o'clock in the morning that's closed? And then when you pass them, why did they hide behind a bush? Well, that gives you the right at that point as a police officer that you believe that there might be some criminal activity occurring. What could that criminal activity be? I don't know. Why would somebody hide and why would somebody be there at 3 o'clock in the morning? That's something we have to find out. We know something's not right, okay? Because it's not normal for people to be by closed businesses at 3 o'clock in the morning and then hide from the police when they see them. So at this point, you have the right to stop and detain that person, okay? Figure out who they are, and that person has to identify themselves. Now, there's a second part to Terry v. Ohio, and that is patting them down for weapons. So you have to have some kind of idea that they might be armed in order to pat them down. For instance, I see a suspicious person, I walk up to them, and there's no printing, no weapons that I see on their clothing, okay? They're not in a known gang area, they're not, let's say it's somebody that's just looking into cars, going up and down in the parking lot. And they've been looking at several cars, checking door handles, okay? I see them at, Woodland Mall, Rivertown Mall, something like that. And I keep an eye on them, checking a bunch of car doors, looking at several different cars. Well, based upon my experience and anybody else's, they're probably looking to do a larceny from a vehicle, steal something from a car that's unlocked. So at that point, you stop and detain them and figure out what's going on because you haven't seen them get into a car yet. At that point, do they have a weapon on them? If they're just checking door handles, if you look at them, you don't see any kind of printing on their clothing of any weapon, do you have the right to actually pat them down for a weapon at this point? Okay? The answer is if it's just they're checking door handles and you don't see any weapons and they're not in a known drug gang area where there could be weapons, what right do I have at that point to pat them down for weapons? So when you see scenarios that are brought, you might have the right to stop and detain them, but remember, you have to have reason to believe that they might be armed with some kind of a weapon. It doesn't have to be a gun, doesn't have to be a knife. I mean, I can use a crowbar or baseball bat, right, for a weapon, or a screwdriver. I could stab you with a screwdriver. So you have to have some kind of idea that they might be armed in order to pat them down for a weapon. Just make sure that you understand that. Two parts to Terry v. Ohio. One, reasonable suspicion, you can stop and detain, and they must identify themselves. Can you put handcuffs on the person when you stop and detain them? Yes, you can. Just because you put handcuffs on somebody doesn't mean that you're arresting them. When you put the handcuffs on them, you just say, hey, listen, you're being detained for my safety. You're being handcuffed for my safety as well as your safety, and you're also being detained because of this reason. Now, if somebody believes that they're in custody at this point and you're doing further investigation on stuff, make sure that you read them the Miranda rights, because that's another thing you might want to know for the test. If I personally believe that I am in custody, at that point, make sure that you're reading them their Miranda warnings or their constitutional rights. Because if I believe that I'm in custody, then at that point, I could basically try to, suppress out the evidence that I said in my testimony because of the fact I thought I was in custody and you never read me my warnings, my constitutional rights. So remember that. Sorry I jump around a little bit on this, but I do want you to understand Terry v. Ohio, different scenarios involving something with reasonable suspicion. Probable cause is a little bit different. So when we look at levels of proof, the lowest proof that we have, sorry about that, this camera sometimes adjusts on me, but the lowest level of proof that we have is reasonable suspicion. Okay, that means I think something criminal is occurring because of this, but I can't prove it yet. Probable cause takes it one step higher. So probable cause is the second lowest standard. And that would be, okay, there's criminal activity occurring. So let's say that guy's behind that building at 3 o'clock in the morning that's closed. You see him, he hides behind a bush. And then you stop and detain him, and you see something printed on his waistband that looks like a crowbar, and you pat him down, and it is a crowbar. Then you walk over to the door of the building, and the building's door, the back door, has been pried open with what appears to be a crowbar. Did I just take that step now from suspicion that criminal activity was happening to an actual being of a building, or a break and entering of a building just occurred? Absolutely. So now I just took that reasonable suspicion to now probable cause to make an arrest on that person. And then the highest level of proof that you can have in criminal court is beyond a reasonable doubt. That's up for the prosecutor to prove that that guy broke into that building beyond a reasonable doubt. So that's not the officers to prove. That's the prosecutor has to prove that, okay? The defense attorney at that point has to put some kind of doubt in the jury or judge's mind to say, no, this person didn't do it. So whenever you're looking at that, the levels of proof that you really want to know is for criminal is the lowest level is reasonable suspicion. Just above that is probable cause. And the highest of all is beyond a reasonable doubt in criminal court. Okay, so just remember those three and you'll be fine, and know the difference between the three if you have reasonable suspicion or probable cause to arrest. Remember, if the elements aren't there to give you enough cause to say, yeah, I could take you into custody, because remember, you're seizing that person at that point, right? So you don't want to do an unlawful arrest on somebody. Sometimes there's just things that you deal with on the street where you're like, crap, I don't know. It could go one way or the other on this one. And you know what? At this point, I got your name, I got your information, I got your statement, got all this other evidence. It's iffy whether you did this or not. Why arrest them at that point? Why not just seek a warrant on that person? I mean, you could do that. You know what I'm saying? So just always look. If you don't have enough or if you don't have enough that you think to have probable cause, make sure you err on the side of caution with that. You can always seek a warrant with a prosecutor on that person. So reasonable suspicion, the lowest. Second highest probable cause. Beyond a reasonable doubt is the highest. Remember with the Fourth Amendment, if you have the right to be in somebody's house, you have a few different things. You can get a search warrant, right? Render emergency aid or have some emergency circumstances that occur, exigent circumstances where you can enter in. So let's say, for instance, I had a case once where I was knocking on the door to an apartment. It was a 911, basically, call that I got with a domestic. And the dispatcher heard yelling in the background. And I got to the scene. My partner got to the scene as well. We stand outside the door to listen to what's going on. And I hear a male and a female yelling and screaming at each other. And I kind of listen to what's going on, because here's the deal. I don't want to knock right away, because if I can hear something, that adds to the probable cause to make an arrest or not to make an arrest. So at this point, what I did is I listened, also heard a bunch of yelling, and then I heard smack, like some smacking, like somebody's getting hit. And I heard boom on the ground. Somebody actually fell on it. I mean, it sounded like somebody got thrown down on the ground, somebody fell on the ground, something after some smacking went and occurred. And immediately once I started hearing the smacking and the boom, I knocked on the door, said, Kentwell Police, open the door now. All of a sudden it's silent. Just silent inside. My partner and I are like, what the heck's going on here? I knock on the door again, Kentwell Police, open the door now. Nobody opens it. At this point, I'm like, did he just kill somebody in there? So I kick open the door. We enter in on emergency aid, okay? Because at that point, hearing somebody getting slapped, hearing somebody hit the ground, and then it's silent, Once I kicked open the door and went inside, my partner and I, we announced who we were. All of a sudden, we see this guy holding this girl down on the ground with his hand over her mouth. So, could I enter there without getting a search warrant? Absolutely. It was under emergency aid or exigent circumstances that I entered in on. Okay? Yeah, we arrested him for domestic assault at that point. So, we look at that. That would be reason why you could be in somebody's house under some kind of exigent circumstances. You can also search somebody's house if you have consent. Now, if you have consent, make sure it's on video and make sure that there's a written document where they signed it that gives you consent to search that house. Just in case, because people are always going to say, I never said that they could come in and search that house. But remember, once you get that consent to search the house, as soon as the person says, I'm done giving you consent, you can no longer search. You can no longer search at that point. You have to stop immediately. So if you're going to the bedroom and you're opening up the door and they said, wait, stop, I don't want you to search anymore, you got to stop right there. Search is done. Now, if you're in a person's house legally, say they let you in, and you see something sitting on the counter and maybe it's cocaine. Well, at that point, if there's cocaine right there and you see it, you have the right at that point to seize it because it's in plain view. So always remember that plain view exception. So let's say I go into a house and I have a search warrant that I'm looking for long guns. If I'm looking for long guns, in that resident, and I have a search warrant for long guns, okay, as soon as I go inside that house and we start searching for long guns, if I open up a little underwear drawer for a long gun, obviously a long gun is not going to fit in that little underwear drawer. And in that underwear drawer that I open up, let's say that there's 5 ounces of cocaine, okay? At that point, hold on a second, that wasn't in plain view because it wasn't open because I had to open the drawer. However, can I take it? I mean, you could take it, but you're not going to charge them because you're outside the parameters of that search warrant. I hope you understand that. So, I mean, yeah, you could seize the drugs. You can't charge them with it because if you try to charge them with it, the fruit of the poisonous tree, the exclusionary rule applies. Okay, any defense attorney that's smart at that point will put a suppression hearing to suppress that evidence out if you did try to charge them because it wasn't written in the search warrant. However, if you had in the search warrant that you were looking for long guns and ammunition, that also that goes to the long guns. Well, now the ammunition, I mean, a bullet isn't that big. Could a bullet now fit in the underwear drawer? Absolutely. So now you open up the underwear drawer looking for the ammunition that's written in the search warrant, and there's 5 ounces of cocaine in there. Now, can you take the cocaine and make an arrest also on that? Yeah, because when you open the door at that point to look for the ammunition, the dresser drawer, at that point, the cocaine now is in plain view. Yeah, the cocaine's not in your search warrant, but it's still the area where you're searching is in the parameters of your search warrant. So just understand with when we talk about the Fourth Amendment and when you're searching for stuff, if you're looking for long guns, and that's the only thing you put in there, make sure you're only looking where long guns can fit. If you're looking smaller areas where they couldn't fit, well, now you're going outside those parameters. Just remember that stuff as you're doing stuff to make sure that you're within the law and you're not violating anybody's constitutional rights. I always like to say, I remember Graham versus Connor. Graham versus Connor has to do with a diabetic. We know this one, okay? Has to do with diabetic going to that quick store, runs in, runs out. The officer at that point thinks that they just robbed the store. He goes to pull him over. Altercation occurs. Use of force occurs during that time. But the officer didn't know that Graham versus Connor, that he was actually diabetic. Well, when he was diabetic, officer didn't know that. So for use of force and stuff like that, we have to look at 20/20 hindsight. Remember that. So 20/20 hindsight fell under Graham versus Connor dealing with diabetic. You got to put yourself in the situation. What would a reasonable officer do in that same exact scenario? Would a reasonable officer believe that this was occurring, or would a reasonable officer use this much force in that situation? So whenever you think about Graham versus Connor, think about the diabetic, okay, that has to deal with it, that went into the quick stop to find some orange juice real quick because he felt himself starting to have a reaction right now and for diabetic reaction, and there was too long of a line, so he quick runs out and jumps back in his buddy's car, and his buddy peels out to go to his house. And obviously the officer's like, okay, I saw his car quickly pull in, guy run in, guy run out, and the car drives off fast. I think they just robbed it. So he stops them, reasonable suspicion, Terry v. Ohio, right? And at that point realizes later after the fact that he was actually a diabetic. So 2020 hindsight falls under Graham versus Connor. Tennessee versus Gardner has to do with deadly force. Now, I want you to remember that. So Tennessee versus Gardner, when you're gardening, you plant stuff in the ground. When somebody dies, you put somebody in the ground. That's how I remember that case. So Tennessee versus Gardner, okay, Memphis Police Department, they had a fleeing felon, the guy was unarmed, and Memphis police shot him in the back. So that changed the rules of fleeing felons and using deadly force. Remember, use deadly force, someone's life has to be at risk, right? So if I see somebody running at somebody and ready to stab them with a knife, at that point, is deadly force justified? Yes. If somebody's attacking me with a knife, could I use deadly force on them? Yes. All right. But remember, the totality of circumstances you have to prove, and you have to be able to articulate the force that you used on any kind of force. So make sure that if you ever get into the field of law enforcement, that you're able to articulate and justify the level of force that you used against that person. But Tennessee versus Gardner has to do with deadly force. We talked about the exclusionary rule. Just remember that if you grab something illegally, the exclusionary rule will throw that out of play if it's illegally obtained. Miranda warnings. Miranda warnings, this is important. A lot of people will say, oh, okay, so you arrested this person at JCPenney's for retail fraud. Well, let's say this. JCPenney's got this person on video camera concealing merchandise that was for sale. The person walked out of the store without even attempting to pay for the merchandise. Security followed him the whole entire time with the camera. The person never got rid of the evidence or got rid of the stuff that they concealed prior to leaving the store. They walk outside the store. Video cameras show the JCPenney's loss prevention walking up to the person that walked out or that concealed the items. They stop them. It shows on camera the loss prevention retrieving the evidence that they concealed, let's say, in their purse. So let's say they took $100 worth of perfume, and loss prevention stops them. Inside the purse where the person concealed it, they find the perfume. It's all on camera. You have the loss prevention officers telling you specifically, hey, listen, we found this person, we saw them conceal it, they walked outside without paying for it, we stopped them outside, this is the video. You have witnesses seeing it, you have video proof showing it. So now you sit down with the person, you say, hey, listen, you're under arrest for retail fraud. Technically, I mean, you're always going to try to interview the person, but let's say you don't. Okay, I'm not going to interview the person, I have enough probable cause to make an arrest. You can handcuff them, take them to jail, and it's fine. You never got a statement from them, okay? But if you're going to get a statement from that person, because you have them under arrest, and they're going to talk about the crime that you arrested them for, then you want to make sure that you read them the Miranda rights. Because if you don't read them the Miranda rights, then the statement that they give you, if they do give you a confession, it will be thrown out with the exclusionary rule because you never read them their constitutional rights. So remember, that falls under Miranda v. Arizona. So 2 parts to the Miranda warnings. 1, the person's in custody, so you have them in custody. And 2, you're interviewing them about the crime. So if I put somebody in custody and arrest them, okay, at that point, hey, listen, you're under arrest for retail fraud. If I want to interview them specifically, reference the crime itself. Hey, listen, I want to know why you concealed the merchandise and you walked outside the store without paying for it. I want to hear your side of the story of why you did that. At that point, make sure that you're reading their constitutional rights. Why? Because you're interrogating them at that point. But if I'm just arresting the person, okay, and since I arrest the person, let's say that I arrest them and then I'm going to ask them, what is your name? What is your address? Okay, to get their name, their address, their phone number, the personal information, you do not have to read a Miranda for it. It's only interrogation about the crime. So 2 parts, again, to Miranda. 1, the person's in custody. 2, you're going to interrogate them about the crime. Okay, that's the only time where you need to read Miranda. Or if they believe or perceive that they might be in custody, that's another time when you want to read them the Miranda warning. So if you think that the person can believe or perceive they're in custody, read them the Miranda warnings. So if you put them in the backseat of your police car and shut the door, well, I'm going to tell you right now, they can't get out of your car. Okay, so even though they're maybe not under arrest, they can't get out. So they're in your custody at that point. So you'd have to read them their Miranda warnings. Even if you don't think they're under arrest at that point, you're trying to figure things out. Always remember two things: custody, interrogation, Miranda. All right, so going down the things here, jump down to res gesta. I want to talk a little bit about that. I know it's been a little while since we discussed that. But res gesta, I mean, know this, that if, let's say that me and my buddy, we go breaking into a bunch of cars together, and all of a sudden we get chased and the police catch us. So the police handcuff us up, and I look at my buddy and say, I told you stealing that stuff from those cars was a stupid idea. Well, one, I was in custody, I was handcuffed. But the law enforcement officers never asked me anything about the crime yet. I just yelled out to my buddy, I told you it was a stupid idea to steal from these cars. Me saying that is a spontaneous statement, res gesta, that you can use in court, even though I didn't, the officers didn't read me my Miranda warnings. The officers didn't ask me what happened yet. Me, I made a spontaneous statement that was incriminating. That's res gesta. So just remember what res gesta is: a spontaneous statement that incriminates. You can use it. As far as it goes with the Fifth Amendment gives you the right to remain silent and not self-incriminate. So technically, if somebody says to me, like the person at J.C. Penney's, say I'm the person that stole. Okay, so I stole perfume, put it in my bag, walked out without paying for it. The officer says to me, hey, listen, you're under arrest for retail fraud. They read me my Miranda warnings. At that point, I say to the officer, you know what? I don't want to speak to you. I'd rather have my attorney present. That's my right. And you can't take it to court and say, well, the person didn't talk to me as part of their guilt. Okay, so the Fifth Amendment gives me that right not to talk. That's your constitutional right. So always remember the Fifth Amendment gives you that right to remain silent. Alrighty. Another thing that I do want to discuss is use of force. So whenever we deal with inactive resistance, that could be somebody just sitting back, chilling, doing protest, and they're not aggressive. They just maybe sitting. I always like using this thing with sitting in front of an abortion clinic, okay, because it's kind of an easy scenario to understand. If they're sitting in front of the doors not letting people in, and you as an officer walk up to them and say, sir, this is private property, you can't be here, I need you to stand up and move out of the way. And the guy says, you know what, officer, I respect you, I respect your job, but I also respect life and I cannot move out of this door. I'm willing to get arrested for it. And you say again, listen, sir, I need you just to stand up. Just remember this. The first step is that use of force with inactive resistance is officer's presence and verbal commands. That's the first two steps of use of force: officer presence, verbal commands. Okay? So then we start taking it higher and higher. So if you have somebody that's inactive resistance sitting there and they won't stand up, well, at that point, could you maybe use a pressure point, mandibular angle behind their ear to make them stand up? Yeah, you can, okay? But to take pepper spray out and spray them in the face, that's a little excessive on that, okay? Actually, it's a lot excessive. You can't do that. You can't tase them because they didn't stand up. It's inactive resistance, okay? Your verbal commands, you may do a pressure point on them to get them to stand up, and that's perfectly fine. As far as it goes with passive resistance, okay? Passive resistance, I'm sorry, I got to take that back. Inactive resistance is you and that person talking. Passive resistance at that point is them just sitting there and they're not gonna stand up. They're not gonna fight you. They're not gonna pull away, but they don't want to stand up. So that passive resistance, like, sir, I'm not gonna stand up. At that point, that pressure point you put on them. So inactive resistance, I apologize. Inactive resistance would be me saying, sir, I need you to stand up. And they're like, okay, I'll stand up. I'll go with you. Okay, that's the inactive resistant. Okay, as far as it goes with passive resistant, they're going to sit there and they're not going to go with you. They're not going to stand up. So then you might want to use a pressure point to get that person to stand up at that point. As far as it goes with active resistant would be me, like, say you're like, hey, I think you're so-and-so, and I think you might have a warrant for your arrest. And I'm standing there as a normal citizen. I'm like, I don't have a warrant for my arrest, and neither am I this guy. And the officer says, come here for a second. I'm like, no, I'm not going to come here. And they're like, well, hold on a second. I need to identify you. Okay. And say the officer goes to reach out and grab my wrist. But when they reach out to grab my wrist, I pull my wrist away. But I don't engage the officer. I'm just like, get your hand off me. I'm not so-and-so. Let me grab my wallet and show you. Okay. The inactive resistance at that point, I'm sorry, not. Okay. The active resistance with me actively pulling my arm away from the officer. Okay, at that point, an officer may at some point, if I keep trying to pull away, and I am that guy, I keep pulling away, but I'm not trying to assault the officer, at that point, an officer may do a wrist lock on me or something to get me under control. So passive resistance, okay, they're not going to stand up for you. So at that point, you may do a pressure point, mandibular angle, infraorbital, or something like that to get them to stand up. When it comes to active resistance, it's them pulling away from you, where you may want to do some kind of an arm bar or kind of wrist lock to get them under control. Active aggression is now where I'm actively trying to assault you. I come at you, oh, like this, and I'm about to punch you or something like that. When that occurs, that gives you the right now to use pepper spray or a taser on them. So that active aggression. So let's take these things again. Inactive resistance is like lowest level, okay? It's the officer's presence as well as verbal command. Sir, I need you to come stand up, turn around, put your hands behind your back. Person does it. Okay, good. Passive resistance is the next one. Passive resistance is like the abortion clinic. They're just sitting there. They're not standing up. At that point, the officer may do a pressure point to get the person to stand up. That's perfectly fine. Active resistant, they're pulling away from you, not letting you try to grab a hold of them to maybe put them in handcuffs or whatever it might be, but they're actively resisting you. They're not attacking you, okay? At that point, you may do a wrist lock, arm bar, or something like that to gain them under control. As far as it goes with active aggression is them physically coming after you and trying to assault you, or I'm going to kick your ace, and then they're ready to come at you. At that point, you can have the right as an officer to justify that you used a taser or that you used pepper spray or something like that. But you have to articulate what you're doing. So those are some big things that you want to know for this test. Another thing with use of force is suicide by cop. That terminology, it's real. There's people that want to commit suicide, but they don't want to do it themselves. So what they might do is get themselves in kind of a situation where officers respond. Maybe they're sitting outside with a gun to their head in a parking lot. Somebody calls 911. Police come there. The person gets out of the car. They still got the gun to the head like this. And they look at the officers and they point the gun at the officer. As soon as they point the gun at the officer, acting like they're ready to shoot him, at that point the officers shoot back, right? Thinking, oh gosh, action beats reaction. So the officers take a shot and kill him. All right. Well, unfortunately, some people do suicide by cop where they point a gun or put an officer in a deadly force situation to make the officer shoot the person. And unfortunate, that is something that happens, and I feel bad for officers that ever got stuck in that position because, I mean, they didn't want that to happen, So it's kind of a cowardly way that people do stuff and put officers that change an officer's life forever. When officers get stuck in that situation, they got to live with that decision they made for the rest of their life. So it's like, you got to remember that, but it's a true thing. It's called suicide by cop, and it was in your textbook. You have to understand that basically when a person tries to commit suicide by having the police shoot them. Other than that, these are some things that you really want to know for the test. The test, okay, will be on Wednesday. I'll have it open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And it will be like in our syllabus, the last week of class. I just want to make sure that I'm kind of covering everything for you. There will be a lot of scenarios in there. And okay, the other thing that I want to throw out there too, as a law enforcement officer, you can never do a warning shot. Okay, so it's like, stop, police, and they're running and do a shot to make them stop. You cannot ever take a warning shot. Always remember that as a law enforcement officer. Yeah, just know your levels of force that you can do. And everything else I pretty much talked about. Know the difference between probable cause, reasonable suspicion, as well as long as you understand when you can stop and detain, when you can stop and arrest, and when you can stop, detain, and do a pat down for weapons, you should be all right on this test. But remember, if you have probable cause to arrest, you can search everything in that person's wingspan, right? So you can go in the pockets, right, to search in the pockets. However, Terry pat, you got to go pat down on the outside of the clothing for weapons. You can't reach in pockets or anything like that. Just remember that big difference. Other than that, folks, good luck everybody on your test. And again, it'll be open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. I'll post a thing in the announcements of how you're going to take the test. Other than that, I hope you guys, ladies, have a great summer. Hopefully, we start releasing a lot of restrictions, or the governor starts releasing some restrictions so that people can get out more and talk. We are people who are social, and I know that a lot of you are probably don't know what to do with yourselves right now, or watching a lot of YouTube, watching a lot of videos, movies, or whatever it might be. But hey, just remember, read something inspirational, keep your mind in the right spot, and keep rocking things out. Folks, it was an honor being your instructor this semester. If you have any questions, shoot me an email, and I'll respond back as soon as I read it. All right? Hey, everybody, take care. Keep yourselves healthy. See you later.